So, from one Alberta team to the other, it's in time for the talk about the Calgary Flames. But they weren't always in Calgary. Oh no, no. They were a team coming from the United States. The ironic part is that, we had in the late 90s we had two Canadian teams, two Canadian cities lose their franchises to the US, but there's been twice that franchises have gone from the US to Canada, and this was one of them. The Atlanta Flames started as an expansion team in 1972, basically added in with the New York Islanders, mostly because Long Island was ready to have a WHA team, and the NHL wanted to beat the, the WHA to a team on that specific land. So anyway, the Atlanta Flames became a very decent team. Like they brought hockey to the South, and you know the fans digged it. But the Flames in the postseason were just terrible. No playoff series wins as a member of the Atlanta Flames for in the 9 years. In 1980, Atlanta knew their fate and decided to give rid of their team. Calgary was happy to receive the team and bring a fourth NHL. No, sorry, not a fourth NHL team. A seventh, sixth or seventh. I think it was no, it was the seventh NHL team to Canada. Edmonton, Quebec, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, and Winnipeg were there. Calgary was the seventh Canadian team. In Ottawa would be number 8. And that would be the high point of Canada mania. But anyway, Calgary did pretty well in 1981. They even shut down the Philadelphia Flyers in Game 7 of the second round, thus getting themselves into the conference finals, where they fell to the Minnesota North Stars. It would have been funny seeing Calgary in their first year in Calgary get to the Stanley Cup Finals, kind of like what Colorado did with Denver after they got the Nordiques. But anyway, Calgary had an advantage, a very big advantage in a small rink. Their small arena was called the Stampede Corral, which only held 9,000 people, but it was very tiny, kind of like what Buffalo and Boston arenas were. They were undersized due to NHL regulations. But Calgary moved into the spacious Saddle Dome in 1984, and things opened up for them. Pretty much so. In 1986, they reached the pinnacle by defeating first the Winnipeg Jets and then the Edmonton Oilers to get to the conference finals. Of course, in my previous video, I talked about that Game 7 in 1986 for Calgary. It would have been amazing to see Edmonton do so well and all that. So Calgary went to the conference finals against the St. Louis Blues, one step closer to getting a Canadian team in the Stanley Cup Finals. Unfortunately for Calgary, they did suffer a massive Monday Night Miracle type victory to the St. Louis Blues in Game 6. But thankfully, they hosted Game 7, and in their building, they won. So anyway, the Flames took on the Habs in an all-Canadian matchup that, had Canadians salivating. Could have been Montreal, Edmonton, but, what can you do? The Flames won Game 1, but sadly Game 2 was a horse of a different color when Brian Skrulin scored 9 seconds into overtime. Imagine scoring a goal like within the first 20 seconds of overtime, and the fans were just trying to jostle to their seats. Wait a minute. The game's over? How? And by who? And why? And where? And when? But anyway, Calgary unfortunately couldn't bounce back, and the Habs won the next 3 games to get themselves into the Stanley Cup, to get themselves their 23rd Stanley Cup victory. In Calgary, bitter, needing more. Bitterness would soon turn to elation in 1989 when they had a playoff run for the ages. First of all, they had to deal with the upstart Vancouver Canucks, who had Paul Reinhart, former Kitchener Ranger and former Flame defenseman, if you can believe that, come through with a game-win overtime goal. The Canucks were not going to be easy. The Flames knew that, and they had to go to overtime in Game 7. Vancouver was putting the pressure on Mike Fernie, but Fernie was making the saves. And in the final minute, a free goal off the toe of Joe Otto went into the net, and Calgary easily won that game. If a replay had happened, they probably would not have had that goal. So the Flames went on to the second round against the LA Kings, who did the Flames a favor by defeating their provincial rivals, the Edmonton Oilers. Calgary took care of Wayne Gretzky like they wanted to. And then they took on the Chicago Blackhawks, who were the best of a very depleted North Division. Calgary easily won that series in 5 games. So Calgary would go back to the Stanley Cup final, and guess who was waiting? Montreal. This time, revenge was sweet. Calgary won it in 6 games, despite giving up a double overtime goal to Ryan Walter. The Flames were powerfully good. In fact, the Flames were so good, they won Game 6 of the '89 Stanley Cup Finals in Montreal at the Forum, where no team had ever won the Stanley Cup on Forum ice. Visiting team had won on Forum ice. It was kind of a taboo thing. But Lanny McDonald scored one of the best goals of the Stanley Cup Finals with his great effort. That was not the cup winning goal. That was Doug Gilmour's effort. The Flames ended up winning the Stanley Cup in 1989. Lanny McDonald finally got his cup and his 500 goal and 1,000 point in the same season. Kind of nice, the trifecta. Calgary in 1990 tried again, but LA shocked them in 6 games, especially a 12-4 thumping in Game 3, which saw 3 Kings players. I can't remember all of them. I think it was Granato, Taylor, and Robitaille with hat tricks. But anyway, the Flames and Oilers had one of the great clashes of history in 1991 when they were fighting tooth and nail with each other. Calgary would win Game 6 in overtime on the Theo Fleury goal on a breakaway in overtime. People can not forget the Chris Cuthbert call. And Theo Fleury and the Flames are in 7th heaven, whilst Fleury was sliding across the ice on his knees and ends up dumped into the boards. However, Edmonton got their revenge back thanks to Esa Tiikkanen's overtime goal in Game 7. Tikkanen was around the ice. He needed a hat trick, and he got the hat trick and beat Calgary in Calgary and sent the Oilers to the second round, which they beat the Kings until the North Stars got them. Flames were bitter. Even more bitter when they learned that Cliff Fletcher, who was with the Flames organization since Atlanta, decided to go to Toronto to be the GM. And he engineered a very good 10-player trade that helped the Leafs, but not the Flames. Sure, the Flames got Gary Leeman and Alex Godiniak, who were decent players, but in the end, Calgary lost out. They lost McCowan, and they lost Dougie Gilmour. Not good. Calgary would not have a good 92 and 93 season. However, 94, they came back on top, or so they thought. We'll talk about that later. So after the disappointment of 94, 95, the Flames had another great chance. They would take on the San Jose Sharks, the team they could have faced in the second round of the playoffs the previous year if the Flames had won that game against Vancouver. So anyway, Calgary took on San Jose in the first round. It went to Game 7. It went to overtime. And Ray Whitney, who was the second ever draft pick for the Sharks, Pat Flynn being the first one, scored a key goal. And the Flames were knocked out in overtime on their own ice for the second year in a row in a Game 7 when they should have had it. Talk about bad luck. And talk about worse luck for the Flames when it comes to the playoffs. Despite having Jerome McGinley as one of their stars and building a decent team, even though Joe Nieuwendyk left. Of course, McGinley went to Calgary in that trade for Nieuwendyk. The Flames for 9 years were just terrible. They could get to the playoffs, but they would face terrible repercussions and all that. In 2004, things had changed. They picked up a third-string goalie from San Jose by the name of Mika Kiprusoff, who basically took first-team reins from Rowan Turek. And Calgary looked hot. Jerome McGinley, Martin Jelena, a few other key players were on fire. And the Flames fans were taking notice. The Flames would take on the Canucks in the first round of the 2004 playoffs. But the Canucks, even though the Canucks had the 3 seed at the 4 seed, and everyone thought they were looking good, they still had a problem. They had a good line with Morrison, Naslund, and Bertuzzi, but 1/3 of that line was missing in the playoffs for good reason. Todd Bertuzzi's sucker punch on Steve Moore ruined the Canucks. But the Canucks forced a Game 7. Brandon Morrison triple overtime in Calgary. Unfortunately, the Canucks knew that losing Bertuzzi was a big problem. In fact, it cost them dearly because they could have knocked the Flames out earlier, especially in that Game 7. Even though Matt Cook scored a goal in the last few seconds of Game 7 to force overtime. It wasn't meant to be. Martin Gela, the former Canucks, sunk the Nucks. Gela, for the second time in 3 years, had a series-winning overtime goal. He did that for Carolina to sink the Leafs in the 2002 Conference Finals. So the Flames took on the Detroit Red Wings, and Flames fans were like, "Oh, great, we got to face Detroit again." But give Calgary credit; they hung around with the #1 team in the West. Martin Gela, another overtime goal. Can you believe it? He scored that goal in overtime. And Calgary wins the series in 6 games. On to San Jose. And San Jose thought they would get their overachieving bunch into the finals. Strange as it was, they had to face the goalie that they basically dumped off because they thought that Nabokov, or Nabokov as he wants to be called, was good. So Kiprusoff played his heart out, and everyone was happy. Mike Commodore scored a key overtime goal in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, on Mother's Day no less. I know that because I was actually at a Mother's Day thing when the Flames played the Sharkies in Game 1 of the Conference Finals. The Flames won in 6 games, and again, Gela scored the series-winning goal. Amazing. But not in overtime this time. The Flames would now take on the Tampa Bay Lightning, who were basically beasts of the East, to say the least. However, Calgary would not be intimidated by Tampa, especially with Joe McGinley's overtime goal in Game 5 of the final. So Calgary needed to win on Saturday night in Calgary to win the Stanley Cup, and it would have been loud in Canada. After all, Canada hadn't had a Stanley Cup in 11 years to that point. And they nearly had it. Martin Gela allegedly had the puck go off his skate and go over the line, but no cameras caught it. Now, of course, Gela's puck off the skate was definitely unintentional, unlike Joe Otto's 1989 effort. But anyway, I digress. The puck went over the line. ABC cameras caught it, but not CBC cameras. The league decided to weasel their way out by saying that we were looking at CBC's cameras and they never caught that. But ABC did. It's kind of strange how ABC probably would have been pro Tampa. But anyway, that would cost the Flames later, as Martin St. Louis early in the second overtime sent the series to Game 7 with his overtime goal, and Ruslan Fedotenko scored 2 goals to lead Tampa Bay Lightning to the Stanley Cup. And again, Canada left without a cup. The Flames would have a few decent chances, but nothing that could test the time of 2004's great moments. I know Calgary's tried and all that, but that's not the case. So let's talk about the 1994 Calgary Flames in general. Why did they get the what if thing? Well, pure and simple. Calgary had a solid chance to knock the Vancouver Canucks off their perch. The Flames were second best in the conference, and 7th best was the Vancouver Canucks. Flames were easily ready to roll over the Canucks. The Nucks were looking for revenge for what happened 5 years prior because of Joe Otto. But anyway, the Flames were up 3-1. All they had to do was win Game 5 on home ice. They go to overtime. Jeff Courtnall takes a shot. Score. Canucks win. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You go to Vancouver. Heck, I think you won a couple games in Vancouver. But buoyed by the white towel waving fans. Trevor Linden scored an overtime goal to send it to Game 7. No big deal. You're at home. You have a solid chance. You have a 2-1 lead, which you choke. No big deal. You're in overtime. You have a 2-1, and you have Robert Reichel with a great chance for an open net. What the hell? Was that Kirk McLean's left pad? That was Kirk McLean's left pad. Oh, my Lord. And then all of a sudden, Brown to Bure, double overtime winner. Vancouver goes to the next round. Vancouver enjoys the ride all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Calgary could have had much more. Calgary would have definitely had to deal with San Jose, the upstart Sharks. Probably would have put the Sharks in the place. And heck, could have faced the Leafs. So now, time for the what if. Of course, Calgary won that series. And with San Jose winning earlier in the day, the Sharks would be facing the best team available. That being Calgary. However, the Flames' loss meant that the Sharks would take on the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were number 3 in the conference, and would be the Sharks thing. Fortunately for purists, the Leafs did end up winning that game to put things that series to put things in perspective. It would have been nice to see Flames Leafs in the '94 Stanley Cup semifinals. So, situation is easy. Calgary, as being the number 2 seed, and with number 1 Detroit being knocked out of the first round, would take on the San Jose Sharks. The Leafs would take on the Dallas Stars. Now, I'm not a fan of the Dallas Stars. I don't think the Stars would have beat the Leafs. But because the Leafs ended up easily going to the conference finals, the Leafs get the advantage. So of course, it's going to be like, what are we going to do in the Stanley Cup Finals? Well, simple. The New York we don't worry about the East. We leave the East alone. So the New York Rangers will get to be in the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's basically the Rangers will face whoever gets it. If Calgary stumbles before getting to the Stanley Cup Final, then Rangers will be claimed the Stanley Cup. Otherwise, it will be Flames, Rangers in the '94 final. The San Jose Sharks, 33, 35, and 16, now take on the Calgary Flames. Mike Ferdinand has to be the hero, taking on Artis Urbe, the spunky 5'8" goalie. See the starting lineups? Now let's move on. And the Sharks, what? They strike first? Seriously. Sergei Makarov with a goal in the first period. Former Flame, by the way. And, of course, with the Flames, he won the Calder Trophy. Joe Nieuwendyk scores on a power play after Sean Cronin gets called for clipping. That's a football goal. Ronnie Stern gets ejected from the Flames for his elbowing penalty. Larionov takes advantage of it by making it 2-1. And then with Michel Petit in the box, it was a 2-man power play because the 5-minute penalty on Stern was not yet done. Sandis Ozolinsh scored a 5-on-3 goal to make it 3-1. The Sharks would put things into perspective. Sandis Ozolinsh made it 4-1 on a power play goal. Johan Garpenlov made it 5-1. Ferdinand is chased from the net. Sandis Ozolinsh gets a hat trick, and he's a defenseman. The Flames put 3 goals up in 40 seconds, but they still cannot win the game. Fleury with 2, Roberts with 1. The '94 Sharks had to deal with Ozolinsh, Smolich, Makarov, Garpenlov, Larionov, Norden, Ellick, Whitney, Dahlen, Cronin, Erie, Pafaloon, Kip Miller, Tom Peterson, Jay Moore. Calgary used McInnes, Krause, Petit, Yanni, Fleury, Masil, Poslowski, Solapsky, Nieuwendyk, Roberts, Otto, Reinheim, Reichel, Nylander, and Ronnie Stern. So Trefilov didn't do that badly in net. Urbe did much better than you thought. Ozolinsh, Fleury, Norden are your 3 stars. Ron Stern got ejected. So on to game 2. And that's the Calgary Flames we all know and somehow adore. Ozolinsh made it 1-0, and then the Flames went to work. Fleury, Nieuwendyk, Reichel, 4 goals in the second period. Sergei Makarov made it 2-2. Makarov even tied the game, and we're thinking the Sharks are going to win. Then Johan Garpenlov made it 5-4 for the Sharks. Solapsky at 7:26 tied the game. Joe Nieuwendyk scores a hat trick goal at 8:13, and then 13 seconds later, Gary Roberts chases Urban from the net. Nylander and Yanni score goals, and the Flames win 9-5. It could have been a whole lot different. Nieuwendyk, Roberts, Fleury are your 3 stars. On to San Jose. Both teams decide to keep their goalies, especially the Flames. And it didn't work. The Flames get shut out 3-0. Makarov, Larionov, Dahlen. So the Sharks are showing their bite. Probably going to face the Toronto Maple Leafs. Urbe with the shutout. Ferdinand got the 2nd star, I guess, for his bravery. Larionov, 3rd star. At 2-1, the Flames are desperate. Worst of all, they lose in overtime, 3-1, so the Flames are really in trouble. Sharks put up 4 goals in the first period. That being Ozolinsh, Larionov, Norden, and Ozolinsh again. Sandis Ozolinsh, boy, what a guy. Joe Otto and Robert Reichel. I forgot Joe Otto was on that 94 team. But anyway, Fleury made it 4-3, and then Trent Yanni scored halfway through the period. Unfortunately, the Flames would suffer a massive loss as Paul Krause got ejected for cross-checking. And Makarov scored a minute 33 in, so the Sharks have a 3-1 series lead. Ferdinand is not playing his best. Ray Whitney's the guy who got mashed by Krause. Kip Miller also was hurt too. So Ozolinsh, Makarov, Larionov. So now the Sharks are up 3-1. The Flames decide that they might need to rest Mike Vernon and put Trevor Kidd in. I think it's a tactic. And the tactic works. 7-4. So scored. The Sharks do score 1 goal in the first period, Garbeloff, but McInnes, Nylander, Newdyke, and Field made it 4-1. Ozolinch made it 4-2. Pat Falloon made it 4-3. Sharks were coming back, but Reichel's goal chased Urbe from the net, and then Reichel got another power play goal. Gary Roberts gets a unsportsmanlike 10-minute penalty that basically puts him out of action, but the Flames still get a goal with Robert Reichel to make it 7-4, and that was the final score. Jimmy Wade did okay in that. McInnes, Roberts, and Reichel, the 3 stars of the game. Sharks still need to win one more game. The Flames don't want to risk putting Mike Vernon in the net, especially after Trevor Kidd won the game. So what do? They leave it to chance, and wow, the Sharks would have got to the conference finals. I never would have guessed that. So the Sharks would have faced the Leafs, and the Leafs probably would have had their way with the Sharks to go to the Stanley Cup final and lose to those pesky Rangers. 4-2 score. Kip Miller scored a goal for the Sharks. Todd Ellick gets a 10-minute misconduct, but that doesn't seem to do anything. Paul Ranheim made it 1-1. Don't remember that guy. Phil Fleury made it 2-1, but Todd Ellick, Sergei Makarov, and Ozolinch basically end the series. The Flames gambled with Trevor Kidd. Absolutely. He won game 1. Urbe, Makarov, and Whitney are your 3 stars. And Lord have mercy on the Calgary Flames. The San Jose Sharks would have got themselves a party going on right here, right now. Wow, I didn't think the Flames were going to be that bad against the San Jose Sharks. I guess it was good that they lost in the first round, but not good in '95 when they lost. But what can you do? What can you do?